All right, this is Jack Yates again. This is my third video, but 16th video in total, so that's exciting. From the third day of South by Southwest. I'm a graduate student, Masters of Science in Marketing, and the event I want to talk about is called Breaking Barriers, Psychedelics as the Next Employee Perk. And this event was, held by four people. One's name was Candace Jodis, who was the former CPJ of CVS being like the pharmacy chain. This guy, Lee Lewis, who worked from the Health Transformation Alliance, which was basically just like a center to help transform things. And then a woman named Sherry Rias, who came from Athena, which was, if I'm saying that right, Ethnia, which was sort of like an insurance company for psychedelics, and I'll get more into that later. And then a woman named Kat Thompson, who runs a psychedelic retreat center in Oregon called Fractured Soul. So I'm gonna try to go as fast as I can, because there were also a lot of interesting statistics and notes in this. But I walked into this talk with sort of the preconceived notion that it was going to be kind of talking about like that tech bro thing about like microdosing and going to work and being more creative and positive and getting work done, which like they touched on but barely. What it was more about was including psychedelic retreats into employee work insurances as a way to combat depression. And the talk was sort of opened by Sherry, and she opened with this quote where I wrote down, where she said, "Most people don't appreciate how bad mental health is in the workforce, and that untreated mental health issues cost $3.7 trillion lost in the workforce, and that's just in the United States, and that 10%, and that employees with depression have a 35% reduction in productivity, and that for every employee struggling with a mental health issue, there's a $17,000 lost annually per individual employee, and that number could probably be a lot higher too in certain spaces. And they also describe how like in a closed work environment that's in person, anxiety and depression can be like contagious, like if you're in there kind of giving off bad vibes, it can kind of spread. And that, they talked about an interesting point, which was also that post-COVID, 7 out of 10 employers invested in mental health as a insurance point, because they knew that everyone was struggling during COVID, so they wanted to help their employees by making mental health included in their insurance. And that 1 in 4 employees, but the issue there is 1 in 4 employees, don't even know if they have mental health insurance. And that 60% of people generally are treatment resistant. And then they talked about how like traditional SSRIs don't fix symptoms, they just push them away, so you're not really solving anything, you're just sort of like tuning it out. And that while like talk therapy is really helpful, it can sometimes take months, if not years, to work. So this was a really interesting talk, because it's sort of like delved into this legitimacy as psychedelics as a medicine, but not on like a personal effectiveness level, more on like a wider corporate engagement level. And the fact that like there are companies who are taking on Sherry's business and including psychedelic retreats in their insurance, because they can sometimes be like a little different. And that the whole point of like a psychedelic retreat, which isn't really achieved by like talk therapy, or it can be, but not necessarily, or SSRIs, is that what you need to do to cure things like anxiety, depression, is like rewire your nervous system, particularly in the brain. And quote, "What matters most is that the nervous system feels safe again." This is from that quote is from Kat Thompson, the head of Fractal Soul, the retreat, where she served over 8,500 clients, and she's only been open for like, I think she opened the place in 2020, so 3 years, 85 clients for her small retreat in 3 years is pretty good. I was even talking to a gentleman that I met yesterday who told me about Kat, who actually has gone to his retreat. His name is Scott. I think I mentioned him in some of my other videos, and he's brought his wife there. He's going to bring his son there when he turns 21. And that at Fractal Soul, Kat has a 95% positive outcome rate with her clients. So, and that's just after, one session. Granted, it's not just a session. There's like therapy and mixed in with everything. But one of the things they begin to talk about is why more employers aren't doing this. And while like the numbers are growing, I think Sherry's company just recently hit, I think 250,000 in companies insured, companies that are giving out insurance to their employees for psychedelic retreats, which is a huge milestone. But that big companies are nervous about it. They're kind of agnostic and they don't want to make a stand. This is Lee talking about it, Lee Lewis, who is the health of the Health Transformation Alliance, because as beneficial as they are, psychedelics are still tied up in this like political sort of PR public image space. So if an employer comes out and openly says, well, we're going to put this on our health insurance, it's a form of endorsement. It's a form of admittance that and this is just me talking now, that the products work. And when you have a board of directors and a massive stock price to worry about, it can be like a little dangerous to do that, because people could negatively interpret that, the whole company's going to be run by like hippies running around on mushrooms now, and like you could plummet the stock. So that's my thought, going off of what Lee said about employers wanting to be agnostic. But he also said that in 7 years, most employers will cover this treatment. Most employers will cover this treatment, but that it's going to be a big challenge to get there. But that they're also kind of trying to reword it. At the end of the talk, I spoke to all four of them for a while after the talk. But during the talk, I actually got up during their Q&A on the microphone and asked the question, how do you market this? Marketing student, which was cool. It was fun to ask them a question on the microphone, but their answer was basically like, you have to reword things, and there's a lot of rules around it, and it's hard. You have to call it innovative or transformative mental health treatments instead of psychedelic clinic, for example, because like Google, they talked about how they've had hundreds, it's probably an exaggeration, but a bunch of Google ads taken down because you put the word psychedelic and Google's immediately like, nope, you can't advertise this, gone. And really emphasizing that it's legal and it works. I mean, Kat also gave a statistic that 80% of people got off SSRIs, antidepressants, after ketamine therapy. 80%. Like, these are huge numbers. And on the point of why companies haven't, endorsed this stuff, Candace Jodas, who was the former head of benefits for CVS, ironically, huge company, but also pharmaceutical company, ironically, she repeated about how SSRIs don't work, and that healthcare is the second largest spend in a company after payroll. And of course, she would know, being the former head of benefits. And these decisions are usually made by HR, people whose jobs are kind of like, the first one to go, usually, when people start getting fired. And that's, psychedelics is a stigma. And that we talked about before, so for a company like CVS, for example, to come out and publicly endorse them is like a huge statement about a stigmatized drug thing, whatever you want to call them. And that, the point about saying healthcare in a company, health insurance in a company being the second largest spend, it's like, to convince companies to take on more in their healthcare, you have to do a lot. You have to do something like have a global pandemic that shuts the world down and makes everybody depressed to get 7 out of 10 companies to adopt mental health into their health insurance. And she says, employers want to be innovative. Employers are always looking to be innovative, but they don't want to be the first one to be innovative. And then after that, that was some of Candace Jodas' input. And they also just sort of emphasize this point of like, this stuff can be life-saving with suicide, like veterans and PTSD, which I've mentioned a lot in this video, I think, and other videos. And how Candace Jodas actually talked about her experience with ketamine therapy and postpartum depression, and how she had horrible postpartum depression. Ketamine therapy fixed it after one use, which is huge. I mean, and this movement is growing. I'm keeping an eye on the time, but it's getting bigger. But the fact that companies are starting to adopt psychedelics on their health insurance plan is another sort of indicator that the future of this is positive, and that it's becoming increasingly something to take seriously. And I wish I had time to talk more about their marketing answer, but I don't, so I'll just end it here.